Hey there folks. So in the last video we got our character playing animation, so now they've got idle and they've got walk for their ground animation. And what we're going to do in this video is we're going to look at how we can use something called blend spaces to blend seamlessly between the idle walk, and also we're going to add some running. So we're going to have a look at adding another enhanced input, another control for our character, and have the option to actually make them sprint. And that's going to allow us to have 3 animations in that one state in our animation state machine that are all being blended between based on our character's speed. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to look to do now is actually creating the sprint functionality on our character. So I've gone here to my inputs folder and I'm going to start by just creating a new input action. I'm going to call it IA_sprint. And if I actually go into there, we've got this digital ball as the value type, and I'm fine with that because the actual sprinting button, it's either going to be down or not down. It's either that I am sprinting or I'm not sprinting. So I don't need a value that's going to actually determine how far a key is being pressed down for this. It's either on or off. Okay, so let's just go now to the mapping context. And in the mapping context, we are going to add that sprint that we just had a look at. So I'm just going to bring these all down and add in sprint. And the key that I'm going to add in here for sprint is going to be, let's go with left shift. That's very default to use. And for now, I'm actually going to go with a trigger. I could leave it as default, but let's just go with while it's down. And we could go with press, but we'll go with down. So we have to be pressing the key down. And then when I release it, it's going to stop. And let's go into our base character because we now want to create an event that runs off of sprint. So if I search for sprint, there are only 2 things I'm going to find, which is the event and the value for that input action I've just made. And I'm going to use the event, and we're just going to expand this out. So we could use triggered, and we could say that every single frame I'm going to be actually running. But the problem with that is that we don't need to actually update and tell our character to use the sprint speed every single frame. We just need to do it as soon as we press down that key. So started is going to happen once the moment that this event has actually been fired. And we've also then got cancelled and completed, so we can use those to stop and revert ourselves back to our original speed. Now, speed exists inside of the character's character movement component. If you click in here, you go over and go down to the movement section, so movement walking. You can see we've got max walk speed, and our default on our character is 600. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this in, because by dragging it in, it allows me to then get access to the things that are here. And I can set max walk speed. Okay, I'm actually going to duplicate that to have 2 of them because I want to have the running one and I want to have the walking one. Just make sure both of them have a target assigned to them. And I want to say on started, let's set this one to be run. And I might just click on this little speech bubble here to say run speed. And then this one, I'm going to just click on it to say walk speed. And I'm going to do this one on cancelled and on completed. So if something was to get in the way of this and cancel this input before it could happen fully, or the moment I release the key, I'm going to reset. Now, right now, max walk speed being 0 is obviously going to mean that my character can never move. So let's go with our max walk speed here for the default one being 600. Only because we know that 600 over here is the default that we're already running at. And this one, let's go with something like 1000. Now, obviously, these values you can play around with a little bit yourself and find out what works for your character. One of the things I would recommend that you do is just consider, rather than having them set only here in these nodes, which is a bit bad for our kind of, optimization and organization of this later if we want to make any changes, just right click this and promote it to a variable. And you'll see what it's done is it's created a variable with the same name as what was plugged in here. And also if I compile it, you can see it also has the same value assigned to it. So let's go with this one being max run speed. And let's also right click and promote this one to a variable. And that one can stay as our max walk speed. Okay. And that one as well, compile it, and it should say that this one here is. Oh, it's 1000, so let's just change it to 600. Okay, so we've got max walk speed of 600, max run speed of 1000. And if I now go into my thing over here and press play, if I walk normally, we have our 600. If I hold down shift, you can see my character is normal and then speeds up. Now obviously he's still playing his idle to walk animation transitions here, and he's moving a lot quicker, so we end up with what's a bit of a slidey movement. So what we could do with here now is like actually thinking with our animation, how can we get it so when we're moving at like 600 we're using walk, and when we're moving at like 600 through to 1000 we use a run animation instead. Now look at that character over there, much more dynamic as he's in the middle of a run. So to create that transition, what we're going to need is a new asset that we haven't actually created before. And we're going to go to our animations folder for this, and we're going to right click, and we're looking for something called a blend space. Now it exists in the animation section, and what you'll see is there's two blend spaces. We've got this blend space here, but we also have a legacy section here called blend space 1D. And this is actually a deprecated one that will be removed eventually, I'd imagine. But for now, the only thing we need to know about is that this blend space here has two axes to it, so an X and a Y, whereas this one here in the legacy only has one dimensional movement to it. So this is great for something like what we're doing here with idle, walk and run. This is great if we want to have our speed as a value mapped against something like direction. So if you want to have strafing, if you want to have different walk animations for walking forward versus walking backward. Now I'm going to stick with the blend space, and the Unreal documentation does say going forward, if you want to create a blend space 1D, just create a normal blend space and only use one axis of it. So that's what we're going to do for now. So when I create it, it's going to ask me what skeleton do I want to use. I know that all of these are using this scale character dummy female. So I'll use that one, and I'll go with BS underscore, and I'll just call this idle, walk, run, or you could call it something like ground locomotion. And if I open that up, this middle section here is our preview. So this is going to default to, you know, right now the T-pose because there's no animations assigned. But as we start putting animations here into this graph, we're going to be able to see this here updating based on these values. So over here, we've got these two axes. I've got my X-axis and my Y-axis of the graph. At the moment when they start and they're new, they're both called none, and they both default to 0 to 100. And let's have a look over here on the left hand side. I've expanded out my axis settings, so if you don't see this already, you can go to axis settings and expand out horizontal and vertical. Now as I've just said, a one dimensional is only actually using one of these axes, so we'll just go with just the horizontal for now. We'll minimize the vertical, we're not going to worry about it. And with the horizontal axis, we're going to call this speed. So as we go along this, we're going to be increasing our speed. And as we go across up this value, we're going to go from idle to walk to run. And it's got two different values. So the minimum value, well, our minimum value for speed is 0. That's when we're standing still. And our maximum, we'll just go from 100 and actually bump this up to like 1000. We're only doing 1000 right now because that's our character's run speed. We can add some extra grid divisions. So if you want to separate this into more sections, and for snapping them, at the moment we're not actually snapping to the grid, but if you have more sections and snap to grid, it can be quite useful to say, you know, here's my walk, here's my run, here's my strafe for right, strafe for left, and walk backwards, and we can actually separate all those different elements. So let's start putting some animations in here. The first one I'm going to do is I'm going to take my idle animation, and I'm going to take it and drag it down into the bottom corner. Now, it's been quite useful there because it snapped it right to 0, 0. But if it didn't actually snap to 0, 0, let's say it dragged it over to here, you can click on the actual point here for the animation. And here on the speed, I can 0 it and 0 on the other one. And you can see you can move it around. Now, the preview has updated. You can see it's using the idle animation, which is great. So let's now take our walk forward animation. And I'm going to drag this here and put it at around about, let's go with 400, 450, somewhere around there. You can play around with these values. When you start pressing play and testing this out, just look at how much your characters are sliding their feet around. Maybe their animation doesn't fully meet up with the speed you're going at, and maybe you need it to start earlier or start later. And there are some automated things, but we'll have a look at those in a future video for how to automate this process. And we've also got run forward. So I'm going to just drag run forward in. I could put it right to the end, or I could put it just before the end. So you see, I could put it here for like 900, and then the last 100 of this will always be that. Or I could drag it right to the end there. And it just means that all of this value range here is the space for the transition to happen in. It's up to you where you put that. Just know that you can move it around as much as you need. Now, obviously, I've put in walk, I've put in run, and we haven't seen any changes here. So you see here, hold control to set preview point. Down here, we've got this little green point. And if I actually go over this bar here and hold down control, you can see that as it moves around, it previews the value. So I can see I'm previewing at 25 speed right now. Look at my character just edging forward just slightly. And if I drag this up, as I drag up into a proper walk, and then drag up even more, he'll go into a sprint. And then back down to walk, and then back down into idle. Okay, so that is our blend space, and we are able to use this for a whole lot of stuff. In future videos, we'll look at other blend space examples, like how to use aim offsets for looking up and down, maybe stepping around the character, but basically anywhere where you'd want to have nice seamless blending between a bunch of animations based on variables and values. Now with our blend space created, what we can do is we can actually come back over to our animation blueprint for our character. So here we've obviously got our state machine for ground locomotion, and we have our idle going through into idle walk run, or walk run in this instance. Now for this, we're actually using our speed to determine whether we should go from here into here. So what we could do is we could have our blend space inside of this one, but if we did that, there'd actually be no point to having this idle, because idle's actually incorporated and put already into the idle walk run blend space that we've just done. So in this instance, what I'm actually going to do here is I'm just going to take the things that we have, and I'm just going to rename this one now to be idle walk run. And if I go in there, rather than just using the idle animation, instead, I'm going to come over to the asset browser, and you can see I've got my blend space. I can just drag that in, and you'll see that there are two inputs to my blend space. If you'd use the one dimensional, you'd only have one, but you can see I've got speed and I've got none. Now, I'm not too bothered by the fact that there's one called none that I'm not actually using, but if it bothers you, obviously, just use the one dimensional one for now. But here I can take my speed value and I can plug that into there. And now that keeps on getting fed into this blend space player, and that will obviously be the same as me changing this value here and blending along as we go. Okay, so we've got all of our animations obviously set up in the blend space. We've told this one to use that inside of that state. If I compile and now go over to my anim preview editor, you can see I've got the speed value. Let's drag that up, and as we get into 400, he's walking, and as we get higher up to the 1000, he's going to be running. Okay, so compile it, save it, come over to our character. They are still in idle, so that's perfect. When we move, they're going to move around with the walking, and if we run, our character is playing a run animation. Okay, so that's brilliant, because now we're able to blend between all those different animations dependent on the speed of my character. When we jump up and down, we don't actually play any of our animations. So in the next video, what we're going to look at is how to take this further by actually putting some jumping and falling and landing animations onto our character. And that will kind of complete our first basic animation blueprint for our character. Thanks for watching, folks. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing to access more of my Unreal Engine content.